Welcome to the Deep Dive, and today we're going deep on Baron de Montesquieu.
Yeah, huge name from the Enlightenment.
Huge.
Yeah.
And for our listeners who are, really into philosophy, this is going to be a good one. I've got the research right here, and wow, get ready to rethink, like, government, liberty, even, like, the weather.
The weather, huh? That's Montesquieu for you. Always connecting the unexpected.
So he wasn't just, like, some philosopher in an ivory tower. This guy was out there in the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, born into a noble family, became a lawyer, and even served as President en Mortier in the Parlement of Bordeaux.
Wait, President a what?
President en Mortier. It was a powerful judicial role, like a chief justice in France's pre-revolutionary system.
Okay, so he really knew the ins and outs of power, not just, like, theorizing about it.
Hands-on experience. And then, he traveled extensively, especially to England.
Ah, England, the land of, like, constitutional monarchy, right?
Yeah.
Huge contrast to the absolute monarchy back in France.
Exactly. You can see how those experiences shaped his thinking about different ways societies organize themselves and the implications for individual liberty.
So let's get into the texts. First up, the Persian Letters. Now, this isn't your typical philosophy book. It's a satirical novel written as letters between, get this, two fictional Persians traveling through Europe.
I love the Persian letters. It's brilliant on so many levels.
So help me out here. What can a philosopher, like someone really into the deep stuff, glean from this kind of approach?
Well, first, the humor. You've got these Persians misinterpreting everything they see in Europe. It's hilarious. But it's also a sharp critique of European society, its vanity, its obsessions.
Like holding up a funhouse mirror to Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exposing all the flaws and absurdities. But then there's this other layer, and this is where it gets really philosophical. One of the Persians, Uzbek, considers himself super enlightened. But get this? Back home, he's a total despot, ruling his harem with an iron fist.
So there's this tension between his supposed enlightenment and his own, like, tyrannical behavior.
Right. And that gets to the heart of the problem of self-knowledge. Can we ever truly be objective about our own beliefs and practices, especially when it comes to power?
It makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, so the Persian Letters is more than just a funny travelogue.
Oh, way more. It's a deep dive into human nature and especially hypocrisy. It lays the groundwork for his later, more systematic work, The Spirit of the Laws.
All right, let's talk Spirit of the Laws. This is a huge book. Montesquieu sets out to explain, not just describe, the mind-blowing variety of laws and social institutions throughout history and across cultures.
It's incredibly ambitious. He's trying to get at the underlying causes, the why behind all this diversity.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for a philosopher. It's not just about what the laws are, it's about what forces shape them, right?
Right. He argues that laws aren't arbitrary. They're shaped by so many factors: the people, the type of government, climate, geography, religion, customs, you name it, it's all interconnected.
So it's not just some theoretical idea.
Yeah.
He's really connecting philosophy to, like, political science, sociology, maybe even anthropology, in a way that was, for his time, pretty radical.
Oh, for sure. And then when it comes to types of government, he lays out three main ones: republics, monarchies, and despotisms.
Classic categories, right. But I bet he doesn't stop there.
No way. He digs deeper. He's less interested in just who's in charge and more in how they rule. So a good monarch, one who rules by established laws, is fundamentally different from a despot, even if they both technically have absolute power.
Ah, so it's not about the label, but the substance of how power works.
Exactly. And this leads to one of his most thought-provoking ideas, especially for philosophers, what he calls the principle of each type of government.
The principle. Okay, I'm intrigued. What does he mean by that?
Basically, he's saying every form of government has this, like, driving force and underlying spirit that makes it tick.
So like the operating system, kind of.
Yeah, you could say that. So republics, he says, they run on virtue.
Virtue, like being a good person.
Well, not exactly. It's more specific. It's about putting the common good above your own private interests, loving your country and its laws, even being willing to sacrifice for the state.
Wow, that's a high bar for citizenship.
It is. And Montesquieu himself is kind of skeptical about whether republics can really last, because maintaining this level of virtue is so hard. You need a very specific kind of education to instill that. Food for thought for any philosopher interested in political theory.
Okay, so republics need, like, super citizens. What about monarchies? What's their deal?
Monarchies, they run on honor. Now, that might sound a bit weird at first.
It does.
But Montesquieu argues that in a good monarchy, ambition is channeled into serving the state. People want recognition, distinctions, but they get them by contributing to the common good.
So it's like ambition, but within the rules of the game.
Exactly. And because it's tied to a clear hierarchy, it's actually more stable than virtue. You don't need everyone to be a selfless hero all the time.
Interesting. Republics are demanding. Monarchies are more like structured. So where do despotisms fit in? What makes them go?
This is where it gets a bit darker. The principle of despotism. Fear. Pure and simple. Power through terror.
No sugarcoating there.
Nope. And what's especially concerning from a philosophical viewpoint is that despotisms don't need education, only suppression. Critical thinking is a threat.
So Montesquieu is setting up this like spectrum of government, not just in terms of structures, but the whole psychology, the social vibe.
Exactly. And it all leads into his idea of liberty, which, is a huge topic for any philosopher dealing with politics.
Huge. So how does Montesquieu define liberty? Is it just like doing whatever you want?
Not quite. He says liberty is about feeling safe and secure under laws that protect you from harm.
So it's not just freedom from something, but freedom to something. Like the freedom to live your life without fear of being arbitrarily messed with, knowing your rights are protected?
Exactly. And this has big implications for his view of criminal law. Good laws, he says, they should only be about threats to public order. They got to be clear, consistent, and you got to have a chance to prove you're innocent.
So the law isn't about enforcing someone's personal morality. It's about setting up a framework where people can actually be free within a society.
Right. And you can see how this idea, limiting the law's power, foreshadows some core principles of modern democracies. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Next time, we'll dive into how Montesquieu links stuff like climate and geography to the types of societies that develop.
Climate. Now, I'm really curious. Stay tuned, everyone. This deep dive is just getting started.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Montesquieu. Last time we got into some pretty heady stuff like his life, those satirical Persian letters, and then the groundwork he lays in the spirit of the laws.
Right. And we left off with that teaser about how Montesquieu thinks things like climate and geography actually shape societies.
It's one of those ideas that really makes you think, like how could the weather possibly affect stuff like laws and governments? But Montesquieu makes a pretty compelling case.
Okay, so walk me through it. How does he connect those dots?
Well, he starts with the idea that climate affects people's temperaments. For instance, he says warm climates tend to make people more passionate, easily fired up, but also more fearful. And that might make them more likely to accept strong authority figures, someone who promises security.
Makes sense. If you're living in a place where it's like super hot all the time, you might just want someone to take charge and keep things running smoothly.
Exactly. But then he contrasts that with people in cold climates who have to deal with harsh conditions, right? They might develop a different mindset, one that values toughness, independence, and resisting oppression.
So climate shapes the basic personality of a people, and that in turn shapes their political and social structures.
Precisely. He even suggests that temperate climates, like a lot of Europe, might lead to people with more fickle temperaments, more prone to shifting moods and opinions.
Temperate climates, fickle people. Okay, I can kind of see that.
But here's the key thing. Montesquieu isn't a determinist. He's not saying that climate dictates everything about a culture. It's more like a subtle influence, a nudge in a certain direction that then interacts with all these other factors.
So like climate sets the stage, but people still write the play.
Exactly. Now, geography also plays a role, according to Montesquieu. He argues that fertile lands where resources are plentiful tend to produce monarchies. Why? Because people are more concerned with stability, protecting what they've got. And a strong monarch offers that security, even if it means giving up some individual freedoms.
Like, hey, as long as I'm comfortable and my stuff is safe, you can rule me, king.
Right. But then, in barren lands, where life is a struggle, you get a different vibe. People are more focused on independence, self-reliance, fighting for what's theirs. And those conditions, he argues, are more likely to give rise to republics, where citizens are directly involved in governing themselves.
So the environment itself pushes people towards certain ways of organizing themselves. It's fascinating how Montesquieu connects all these dots.
It really is. But hold on, because it gets even more interesting when he starts talking about commerce. And this might surprise you, but he actually sees commerce as a force for good.
Really? Commerce. I mean, I get that it's important for a society to function, but good. That seems a little counterintuitive.
Right. You'd expect someone as concerned with tyranny as Montesquieu to be wary of the power of money. But he flips the script. He argues that commerce, unlike, say, conquest or mining, is self-sustaining and actually has all these positive side effects.
Okay, so spill the beans. What kind of benefits are we talking about?
Well, for starters, he says it encourages virtues like frugality, peace, even good manners. I mean, think about it. If you're trying to sell something, you're incentivized to be polite, to build relationships based on trust.
It's true. Nobody buys from a jerk. But is that enough to make commerce like a moral force in society?
He goes even further. He suggests that commerce actually softens the hard edges of power politics. It encourages cooperation, decentralization, a bottom-up approach to social order.
So a society that's actively engaged in trade is less likely to be ruled by a despot.
That's the argument. Because commerce promotes independence, self-reliance, it kind of naturally checks the concentration of power in one person's hands.
That's a really interesting idea.
Hmm.
But he also acknowledges that different forms of government need different approaches to commerce, right? Like what works for a republic might not work for a monarchy.
Absolutely. For instance, he's really cautious about kings and nobles getting too involved in trade. It just puts too much power in their hands, and that messes with the balance he's always emphasizing.
Whereas in a republic where power is already more spread out, commerce can actually strengthen that virtue thing we talked about.
Exactly. It encourages initiative, spreads wealth, creates this sense of shared prosperity. It all comes back to those core principles that make each type of government tick.
So it's not about some universal economic policy. It's about understanding how commerce interacts with the specific social and political structure of a society. Montesquieu always brings it back to context, doesn't he?
Always. And he's got some insightful stuff to say about international commerce, too. He sees it as this almost unstoppable force, constantly searching for new markets, new opportunities. He even says, commerce traverses the earth, flies from the places where it is oppressed, and stays where it has liberty to breathe. It's like it has a life of its own.
That's such a cool quote, and it sounds like he's already anticipating some of the key features of our modern globalized economy centuries before it actually happened.
Right, and that's why he thinks things like tariffs and trying to manipulate currency are ultimately futile. You're trying to control something that's inherently uncontrollable.
Like trying to dam a river. It's just got to find another way to flow.
Precisely. And it all ties back to his earlier point about the unintended consequences of laws. Sometimes the best thing governments can do is just get out of the way and let commerce do its thing. But speaking of complex systems, we can't talk about Montesquieu without addressing religion.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, especially considering his whole Enlightenment background.
Right. The Enlightenment was all about reason, challenging traditional authority, including the church. So how does someone like Montesquieu reconcile his philosophical outlook with religious belief?
Well, in the spirit of the laws, religion actually takes a back seat. He's not spending a ton of time on theological debates.
Yeah.
He's much more interested in the practical effects of religion on society.
It's a pragmatic approach. He wants to know, like, how different religions might be suited to different forms of government. He even suggests that some religions are more compatible with certain climates and cultures.
So he's not saying one religion is inherently better than another, just that they might work better in different contexts.
Exactly. But one thing he's super clear on is that the state should tolerate all religions as long as they don't threaten public order. He slams religious persecution and forced conversions. He even calls out the Inquisition by name, saying their actions dishonor their age and spread hatred. That's a pretty bold statement for the 18th century.
So religious freedom is essential for a just society, but the state also needs to stay out of trying to enforce religious beliefs through civil law.
And there you have it, classic Montesquieu, always searching for that sweet spot between individual freedom and social order. He reminds us that the best laws are adapted to the specific circumstances of a people, their climate, their customs, their religious beliefs, even their economic activity. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but it's all connected, right?
It is. He's like weaving together philosophy, political science, history, sociology. It's amazing how he brings it all together.
Absolutely. And he leaves us with so much to think about.
All right, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on this whirlwind tour through Montesquieu's big ideas for the last two parts, from different types of government to like the influence of climate and even commerce on how societies actually work.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. The Persian letters with all that sharp satire, and then, of course, the masterpiece, The Spirit of the Laws.
And it's not just, random theories. He's really trying to connect all these dots, right? Like, how does climate influence people? How does that impact the kind of laws and governments that develop?
He was way ahead of his time in seeing those connections for sure. And for me, what's most striking, especially as a philosopher, is that Montesquieu recognizes there's no magic formula, no single answer for how to create a perfect society.
Yeah, he's all about context, isn't he? The best laws are the ones that fit the specific circumstances of a people, their history, their environment, all of that.
It's like he's giving us this toolkit, but he's not telling us which wrench to use in every situation. We have to
Mm.
figure that out ourselves.
Which is kind of what philosophy is all about, right?
Yeah.
Using our brains to think critically and apply these ideas to our own lives, our own societies.
Exactly. And that's why Montesquieu is still so relevant even centuries later. The questions he was grappling with, how do we balance freedom and order, create just laws, prevent tyranny, those are still the big challenges we face today.
It's like he's giving us this roadmap for navigating those challenges, a really detailed and thought-provoking one.
I think what's most valuable for our listener, someone who's clearly engaged with these big ideas, is Montesquieu's method itself. He's constantly observing, comparing, analyzing. He's looking at different cultures, different systems, trying to understand what works and what doesn't. And he's always open to new perspectives.
It's like he's saying, come on, let's explore this together. Let's question things, challenge assumptions, and really try to figure this stuff out.
And that's the beauty of philosophy, isn't it? It's this ongoing conversation, this search for understanding that never really ends. And Montesquieu, even though he's, long gone, is still a fantastic conversation partner.
Absolutely. He reminds us that philosophy isn't just some abstract intellectual exercise. It's about how we live, how we govern ourselves, how we create a world that's actually worth living in.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this. How do Montesquieu's ideas resonate with you? What insights have you gleaned from his work?
And think about this. If Montesquieu were alive today, what would he say about our world, our governments, our technology, our struggles for freedom and justice? What would he praise and what would he critique? Those are the questions we hope you'll keep pondering.
Use that Montesquieuan method of observation, comparison, analysis. Apply it to your own life, your own community. Keep asking the tough questions. Keep searching for those nuanced answers. And most importantly, keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.